The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is the United Podcast Network.
This is Voices in Validation, brought to you by IVT Network. IVT Network is your expert source for life science regulatory knowledge. Voices in Validation brings you the best in validation and compliance topics. We interview industry experts from pharma, biotech, med devices, and laboratories. Here is the host of Voices in Validation, Stacey.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you all for tuning in again to another episode of Voices in Validation. I am thrilled to have our next guest with us today, Karen Ginsbury. Karen is the president and CEO of PCI Pharmaceutical Consulting, and she's calling in this morning from Israel. Welcome, Karen.
Hi, Stacey. Hi, everybody.
Great to have you here with us today. I am excited to talk about Pharma 4.0 and all of these prevailing technologies and things that are happening so quickly, or as quickly as they can in the pharma industry. And I bet many of those who are not familiar with Pharma 4.0 just yet are wondering what exactly we're talking about. Can you help describe that a little bit, Karen?
Sure. So I wouldn't say Pharma 4 is happening quickly. I would say that some of the people who are listening probably haven't even heard of it. Some people have heard of it but couldn't say what it is. And very few people, relatively few people, can actually describe what it is. The Pharma 4 is the pharmaceutical industry's name for Industry 4.0, which is actually the fourth industrial revolution. The third industrial revolution, some of us older folks remember, because it's when we started using computers. And I'm old enough to remember when we really didn't use computers in day-to-day life. And then gradually and very, very fast, they started coming in until it was unheard of for anyone not to. But Pharma 4 is about connectivity, digitization, and the Internet of Things. Nowadays, we're all connected, whether we like it or don't like it. At any point in time, Google Maps knows exactly where we are and has started telling us how long it'll take us to get home. So we're connected anyway. Target got themselves in some hot water when they pushed maternity vouchers and baby formula vouchers to a 16-year-old girl. And it turned out that they knew before she did that she was pregnant.
Wow.
So in pharma, we're not so good at using data. And Pharma 4 will take us to a place where everything and everyone is connected. And where we are utilizing the connectivity and the data to improve efficiencies within our manufacturing and to reduce the deficiencies, deviations, non-conformancies.
Right. And so I was sort of being funny at the beginning, saying that we're moving quickly in pharma, knowing that pharmaceutical traditionally is a slower moving industry. But all of the things that are going to make up the Pharma 4, the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, big data, those things are happening quite quickly in other industries outside. Wouldn't you say?
I definitely would. When I went to Validation Week Europe, there I was at Amsterdam Airport, and I was for the first time in my life, happy to wait for a taxi. And the line was long, and the reason that I was happy was because about 80% of the taxis in Amsterdam are Teslas. You know that Elon Musk is currently disrupting. He's currently disrupting about 8 industries, including developing pharmaceuticals. And the Tesla, everyone says, is impossible. It couldn't be here. It doesn't exist. But it does exist. And Elon Musk reckons that anybody who's not riding in a Tesla in the next 5 years will be like driving in on a horse.
There you go.
And it succeeds. And when there was a hurricane in Florida recently, So some of the people who had bought Teslas, but they bought the down market version, a slightly less expensive one, got messages to the mobile phones that they would find that they could drive 150 kilometers further than they should have been able to on a fully charged car. The reason being that from his headquarters in Palo Alto, he had released a piece of technology that he had blocked because they hadn't paid for it. And he released it so that they would be able to drive out of the hurricane area, which of course raises a whole question. Obviously, the Tesla is very much a part of the Internet of Things. But for our industry, that would be a massive concern, because then people would say, well, who actually owns that car if he can change the technology by remote? And then we'd come to issues like validation and Part 11 compliance. And so we hold back.
So, right. And I think that's important to note. And I wonder, have we reached that tipping point in the pharmaceutical industry where it's going to be absolutely necessary going forward for the industry, for the manufacturers to begin to embrace all of these technologies, or risk losing out, risk falling so far behind that they're just not able to catch up? And if that's
yeah, we've very much passed the tipping point. We've passed the tipping point on all levels. FDA just released a report to Congress because they've been under scrutiny as to why there are such desperate drug shortages. And one of the reasons is because we are not an industry who uses data. So we don't fix things. We don't prevent things from happening. If something happens, we tend to just sort of plaster it up. And we're not at all good at predicting. Whereas Kira Radinsky, if you check her out, just a young lady in her early 30s who consults for the World Health Organization and can predict where the next pandemic is going to work out based on her algorithms that she's developed. So, we should be doing that. We don't even use mean time between failures on our machines to predict when a machine is going to come crashing down in the middle of production. And that's something that's built in. It's built into the machines. It's available, but we're not good at it. And we do product quality reviews, annual reviews. We do them 18 months later. We're collecting data from 2018. Some companies are still doing it now and analyzing it, and then they come out with conclusions. But it's no longer relevant because now we're towards the end of 2019. So it's just not relevant, and we could have it all online. Right.
And so how are, a lot of what we're hearing now is that patients are going to be able to receive personalized medicine, and it's going to be based on feedback from either devices or from their histories with insurance company, pharmacies, et cetera. And how is that going to work if there's this disconnect between using big data and analyzing it correctly?
I think
gap.
Right. So I think there is a big gap. Although, interestingly enough, FDA has released a draft guidance just earlier this year on continuous manufacturing. And you were asking about the tipping point. So on my way to yet another IVT event, there was The Economist magazine had their technology quarterly devoted to to Industry 4. And on my way back from that same trip, I went through Zurich Airport, and Credit Suisse, which is a banking financial organization, had an entire booklet that they printed out, very fancy one for their investors, all about Industry 4, blockchain, machine learning, artificial intelligence. So I think maybe we should define a few things. First of all, what is big data? Big data is about analyzing, but not humans doing it. It's done completely by machines, by computers, extremely large data sets. that are analyzed computationally to reveal patterns, trends, and associations, especially relating to human behavior and interactions. So the example I gave of Target pushing vouchers to someone knowing that they were pregnant before this person knew that they were pregnant, and certainly before their father knew.
Right.
That is the classic example. Big data can use both structured and unstructured data. So, for example, with these kind of algorithms, you can pull information from emails, from PowerPoint presentations, from not just from databases where it's very highly structured. And therefore, you can get a much better idea of what's going on. In our industry, we talk about data integrity and data governance, but we don't even think about blockchain. Blockchain, do you know what blockchain is, Stacey?
I do. I did an interview a while ago with Tim Sandel, and he talked about it.
Right.
Seems like it's very, very secure. And if we're going to have this kind of data going back and forth, something that's very necessary.
Well, you see, the blockchain, when you mention it to people in our industry, nobody's heard of it. There are very, very few people, although I did just see an article in the PDA letter on blockchain, or PDA journal, so it is coming. But blockchain, if you ask people what the Bitcoin, then they know what a Bitcoin is. Almost everybody's heard of that.
Right.
It's cryptocurrency. Then the Bitcoin uses blockchain data, which is where literally you have secure identification that is unique, that is built on in steps. So as you add another block to the ownership of these crypto coins, of the Bitcoins, it's embedded into the virtual coin, and you have a unique number which shows the whole traceability. But you don't even have to go that far. We purchase clothing, particularly in the United States, and then we find like a day or two later that something's scratching us in the skirt. And it turns out that there's a tag in there and it says this should be taken out before you wear it. What's in that tag? It's radio frequency ID, identification, and it can tell you which girl sitting at a sewing machine in wherever it was, unfortunately, probably Vietnam or China or somewhere like that, and Bangladesh, and they sewed that piece of clothing. And then it'll tell you where it went from there and who handled it. So now we're talking about serialization now in our industry. Why are we so far behind if the whole world is already there, right?
That's
we
my
all have
question.
smart.
So there must be obstacles to implementation of these technologies into pharma. And hopefully you can talk a little bit about what are some of these obstacles? Why is it taking us so long? And not only that, why are the drug manufacturers and other industry organizations so resistant to this change?
It's not just this change that the pharmaceutical industry is resistant to. We are resistant to change as an industry. We are the ultimate in conservative, and to a large extent, regulators have taken us there because everything has to be validated, which means proving that it works, which is good. We want to prove things work. But Stacey, does Google work? Does Facebook work? Does Twitter work? Does Instagram work? These companies are massive. They're running the world today, whether we like it or whether we don't like it. Have they performed validation according to 21 CFR Part 11? They haven't. And are they reliable? No. There are some very unpleasant aspects to those, electronic industries. Sure. But nevertheless, they are here and they are the future. And it's very hard to get away from them. We are burying our heads in the sand out of fear. That's the main obstacle to implementation. Now, I'll ask you, you use a smartphone. You probably use an iPad or some kind of tablet computer. As we get younger, we get more, comfortable with these kinds of devices. And nowadays, if you leave home, last week I was traveling And I left my hotel in the morning and went to my place of work, and I got into the taxi and I realized that I didn't have my phone with me. And I thought I'd left it in the hotel room. The taxi driver says to me, "Do you want to go back?" I said, "Actually, I really don't. I'll manage for a day without my phone." But we almost can't. Now, think about what happens when you go to sign in a pharmaceutical company. You take your employee card, it's a magnetic card,
Right.
and you run it through the machine. And if you want to, you take your friend's card because they say to you, "Listen, I've really got to go somewhere with my kid this morning and do something. Just do me a favor, run my card through, and nothing will happen. I'll be in an hour late, but just run it through at the normal time." So you check around, is anyone looking, and you run it through, right? That's what you call opportunistic data integrity issues, right? Now, if we had, when we joined a company, a smart device, we were given a smart device, and it's biometric. It's biometric. You have to put your finger on it, or it's a retinal scan, or whatever it is, face recognition.
Sure.
You don't have the opportunity anymore for those kinds of unfortunate incidents, which are 90%, if not more, opportunistic. So we'd be better off. Same thing with paperless. You know, people believe that the move to paperless is so massive, what is involved in the validation effort and in securing it, and what if a hacker breaks in? But the hackers broke into the Pentagon. The hackers have got into Merck, Pharma. They got in there a few years ago, and yes, it was bad. So we need to invest in cybersecurity, and we need to put barriers in. But that can't stop us from doing it and from moving forward. What about drones? That's also part of the Internet of Things. Yeah. I have a nephew who's obsessed with drones. He has quite a collection of them in his house. But why can't drones deliver samples? So one of the companies, I think it may be Merck again, is testing drones for remote deliveries of temperature-sensitive pharmaceuticals. Now, drones just go from place A to B according to how you program them. They're not going to divert. They're not going to do anything wrong. Within a facility where there's not even the possibility for someone to divert them, why can't they take samples from the production area to the quality control laboratory?
Right.
Highly reliable.
No, absolutely. And so do you feel like, so you've given several examples of how Pharma 4, if you will, is already being implemented in pharmaceutical, sounds like most often in the larger pharmaceutical companies, and that makes sense financially speaking. Do you think that it's not affordable or economical for these small research labs, who honestly are oftentimes the ones doing a lot of the grassroots work, right? They're doing the ground floor work, which then goes on to become produced in a larger manufacturing facility. So is that part of the slowdown in implementing these technologies, is because of it's not affordable economically?
I don't believe so. I think it's highly affordable and highly efficient. Novartis has a smart factory in Basel. They set it up, I think, around 2017. It is the size of a small apartment. It does the work of a full-size facility at 90% more efficient and 50% of the cost. So there was an article about that in the same issue of The Economist. And if you think about artificial intelligence and machine learning, electronic laboratory notebooks, why should these be more expensive? It used to be that to buy licenses was prohibitively expensive, but they've come down to really reasonable pricing now. But again, there's this barrier that people think, I'm moving from paperless, the regulators are going to take me to the cleaners. Whereas the opposite is the case. I myself underwent a transformation about 3 years ago. I was at actually interesting, now I only just connected it, but I was at a PDA annual meeting, their first annual meeting in Europe, and Madeleine Dole from Novartis, I think it was from Novartis, spoke, and she was talking about how the steps you go through if you use paper hybrided with electronics. for example, take a quality control laboratory where you've got chromatograms and you have to review audit trails and so on and so forth. If you do all of this online, you're avoiding opportunities for interference with transcribing data. So paperless, it's the opposite of what people think. And I've seen this. Companies that are truly paperless, of course, they invest a lot in the design of the system and in thinking about what they really need and defining user requirements. But if they do it correctly, when it comes to inspections, they walk through them. It's easy because you've taken away most of the opportunities for interfering with data. And if we just think about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and what it really is, I don't know if you've ever driven a semi-autonomous car, but a lot. You have or haven't?
I have not.
Oh, so I have, and my husband has one. A semi-autonomous car. Have you ever driven a car with a mobile eye? Mobile eye, mine has. Mobile eye is when if you drive over the white. Right. So
yes, and it sort of tries to pull you back. It's like it sees the line and
that's semi-autonomous. That's semi-autonomous. If it tries to pull you back, it doesn't try. It does pull you back. And the same if you have cruise control and a car cuts in front of you and they're too close, the car will brake.
Right.
You suddenly feel it's braking. The first time you feel it, it's very scary because you feel it not in control.
Right.
The second time you feel it, you know what it is, and you're actually very grateful for it because it takes away the responsibility from you, and you can't have a crash.
Exactly.
So, okay, so that's what these technologies are about. We have been talking, I remember it when I was still working in Teva, and I left Teva at least 25 years ago. Yeah, 25 years ago. So we were talking about man-machine interfaces. Now you're not allowed to. You have to talk about human-machine interfaces, HMI. Mm-hmm. But they weren't, and they aren't. What we call an HMI is just a push button. We just come up to a system which has the ability to be a human-machine interface, in the truest word, for cognitive disruption, where the human beings and the machines merge. And that's what the Tesla does. That's what Elon Musk is working on day in and day out. And that is where we need to be. That the big data is mined and applied back to the system. That's real knowledge management, which is what ICHQ 10 talks about.
Sure.
So we have to do it, Stacey. We just have to do it as an industry. I think no.
Yes. And so, easier said than done sometimes, but I do see that, there are some companies making efforts to incorporate these technologies more and more. But in your expert opinion, from all that you've seen and all that you know that is out there, where do you see us in the next, 12 to 18 months, and then maybe in the next 2 to 3 years in terms of implementation?
So I'll tell you how I discuss this with my clients and also at IVT's events a lot. I ask people the question that I ask, and I think the question that every single pharmaceutical company must ask themselves is, do you have a Pharma 4.0 vision in your company? Because if you don't have a vision now, we're now entering 2020. If you don't have a vision now, by 2025, you will have nothing. We heard a fascinating talk at Lab Week in San Diego last year from Gilead, someone in the quality control laboratory there. They're setting up a smart laboratory. It will be pretty much without human intervention, ultimately. Samples will come in, they will be logged into the computerized system, they will be automatically loaded into whichever system they need, completely paperless from start to finish, with a COA, with the results, certificate of analysis with the results coming out at the other end. I asked when they started on this journey, and they said that the vision was in 2014. And to me, that's exactly how it is. If you don't have a vision now, you ask about 2 to 3 years, it takes a minimum of 5 years to implement, a minimum. So you need a vision, and then you need a task force, and then you need to get going.
Wow. So it sounds like if they haven't already begun down this road of implementation, A, they need to get started right away, or B, they're going to be forgotten in 5 years.
Absolutely. They'll be riding a horse, like Elon Musk said.
Right. So what one or two things do you think industry professionals can do today to start?
I think there's a lot of things that we can do. I think we can think very much about these smart devices to replace magnetic cards. You load up everything on it, and a new employee comes along. They get their job description on there. They get a skills function matrix. They do their competency training there, something like the Khan Academy online, where if you take too long to answer a question, even if you get the answer right, it will push you some tips to re-explain it and ask you a new question because clearly you didn't understand it well enough. And then we'll have more competent employees. And then their work instructions will be on there. This will be their device. That's all they'll work with. They won't have paper at all. So the opportunities for data integrity will gradually become fewer and fewer. You would really need collusion with someone quite senior in the IT department in order to get around these kinds of technologies.
Of course. And then, as you alluded to at the onset, once blockchain becomes part of everyday life in this industry, the chances of that happening are reduced again still.
Right. We can use the blockchain for serialization, which all companies have to do worldwide. It's demanded now in Europe by law, and also in the United States. FDA has a whole section of their website devoted to the requirements for that. And I'm not sure how well informed companies are about it.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like we definitely have a lot to think about for those industry professionals who have only been thinking about it and have not taken steps to begin implementing these technologies. They must start today, as far as I can see, because otherwise they're going to just be left out in the cold.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. So Karen, I think we've covered a lot today. I mean, the technologies, the opportunities for implementation of technologies are enormous. Per our discussion, pharmaceutical is a slow moving industry, but I do believe that now is the time, as you do, and things just need to start speeding up, or they're going to come to a screeching halt.
Yeah, I think so. I definitely agree with that.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate all of your insights today. We're going to have some show notes, some links in the show notes to a couple of the articles that you mentioned in today's podcast. And we'll also open up an area for people to ask questions. So if we have some,
lovely.
Right,
okay.
If we have some questions, I will definitely shoot those your way, and perhaps we can do some follow-up writing or another podcast to address those. But I definitely appreciate you getting us going on all of these thoughts today, and look forward to the next time we get to discuss it.
Likewise, maybe just a closing thought and a little joke, but rather relevant, which is, another of the fears that people have is about transparency. Someone said to me at a workshop, don't you think that people will be worried that they don't understand how this technology works? So my husband, who's a retired musician, has a great joke about that. When wireless microphones were first used, a soprano was hooked up for the first time and she was in a panic. She said to the impresario, "I can't use this. I don't know how it works." To which he replied with a smile, "And you know how the wired one works?"
Yeah, right.
So I think we have to remember, we don't understand how computers work. Most of us don't understand how computers work. We don't understand how our phones work. We don't understand how a car works, but we use them all.
Right.
So I think we have to reduce the level of fear. We need to be prudent, but we need to get going.
Very well said, Karen. Thank you so much. Thank you, again to Karen Ginsbury, PCI Pharmaceutical. Thank you to our producer, Ed Sullivan, and to Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe in your podcast player of choice and share with your friends and colleagues. You can find out more by visiting ivtnetwork.com. Thank you again for listening. And another great episode coming next week. So please tune in again. Thank you all. Have a great day.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.